Hello everyone and welcome to another SnowRunner video. Now in this video we are going to be talking about a blog that the developers recently released about customization, and they talked a little bit more in depth on about what does what. And so this video is going to be a little bit less about the garage itself and more about the technical points of what customization is actually does and what it's actually capable of doing for your vehicle in SnowRunner. So if that's something you're interested in, then stick around because we're about to dive into it. Now, as we talk about the customization a little bit more in depth in SnowRunner, we're going to actually have some gameplay from MudRunner with a couple of mods running in the background. We have this massive 8x8, like just huge truck with a giant trailer that we're going to be hauling out to a garage, doing a couple of other things, and just, you know, in general, playing with trucks and having fun. But with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. And if you would also like to check out the developer blog post, the link to that will be in the description down below. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into all of the details. Now, first off, we're going to talk about how they started up, basically, and they say, step into the garage and craft yourself a monster, quote unquote. The vehicle customization in SnowRunner is extensive. We've made sure you can tailor your vehicle to your specifications, be it cosmetically or for practical purposes. Now, obviously, in this in this update, they definitely focused a lot more on the practical aspects of customization over the visual aspects of customization. But one interesting thing that they did say was they said climbing a mountain with a 30-ton truck requires some serious juice and a fairly casual hold on sanity. And they proceeded to then show this GIF repeating on a loop. Now, that, of course, leads on to the topic of engines, which was another big point of discussion in this update. Now, it's an interesting thing because when you think about engines, you don't really think about like this in this series. You've never really thought about like, well, my engine has this much power and this much torque, but it's only moderately reliable, so I'm not sure if I want to take it on that long drive or try to climb this hill or what have you. But in this game now, we're going to actually be thinking about, you know, tons of different aspects of your engine across the board. Like, for example, all the different stats are speed, torque, durability, and fuel consumption. And then they say, but as the saying goes, with great power comes great fuel consumption, ... sometimes. Now, I'm not sure where that saying came from, but it's only that way in certain scenarios. Now, as a general rule of thumb, yes, as your power increases, the fuel consumption will usually increase. I get that, but sometimes, though, the reason why I think they say sometimes is because I feel like, you know, there are some engines where, like, say, for example, you could have a 3-liter engine that makes 400 horsepower, and you could have an 8-liter engine that makes 200 horsepower, and the 8-liter engine would still use more fuel than the 3-liter engine that's making 400 horsepower versus the 8-liter engine that's only making 200. Now, that's a very specific scenario. Obviously, that's a very specific case. But who knows where they're going with that sort of line of thinking? And I would love to hear your thoughts about that in the comments below as to what they mean by that particular wording. Now, of course, one of the major things that they talked about, which is a staple of this series, is the frame add-ons. And the frame add-ons obviously vary depending on what you want your truck to do. But as they show in this GIF here, you'll actually see that the weight of the frame add-ons is actually affecting the truck's suspension differently, or basically whatever add-on you have on the truck affects the suspension in a different way. Now, this is not a new thing, although I feel like it could add a little bit more depth because now we have to think about tire damage, remember. So if we're having to think about tire damage, something that puts more stress on the suspension could actually cause a bit more of a stressful situation if you were to end up with a puncture, for example. So let's say if your truck barely has any add-ons and, you know, you're still, like, you don't really have that much going on with the truck, you might be driving it to a garage and you get a flat tire. Might not be all that big of a deal, but if you've got, you know, your truck fully loaded down with like fuel or repair equipment or maybe lumber and you get a flat tire, that's a bad day. That's a really, really, really bad day. So I think there's a couple of little things that go into it here and there, and we're going to have to wait and see how we unpack all of these things and how we make them work together when the game comes out. But I, for one, am very curious to see where this whole ecosystem actually ends up, because they really are just stockpiling new features on top of new features on top of new features on top of new features at this point. And speaking of everybody's favorite topic, let's talk about four-wheel drive, diff lock, and everything that goes along with it. So they really did make a point to touch on this, because there's a lot of different aspects of it that are going to be new to SnowRunner itself, and not necessarily new in terms of how they will work dynamically, but new in terms of how they will be implemented. So let me go ahead and go over with you guys what they said here. Now, it said, they say differential lock and all-wheel drive capability. It said, while some vehicles have diff lock and all-wheel drive on by default, and some can switch it on and off, other vehicles require a trip to the garage to acquire this valuable capability. Now, they said diff lock and all-wheel drive can either be always on, switchable, unavailable, or upgradable, with upgradable meaning that it needs to be installed on the vehicle before you can actually use it. Now, to be fair, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, yes, but the upgradable option is definitely a new one to the series. Now, they go into, like, explaining how diff lock works and what it does and everything, and how your vehicle will have, you know, limited cornering capability with the diff lock engaged, and that's all well and good. But what makes me wonder about it is if they're highlighting it as, you know, as a point of discussion, then it almost makes me wonder if they've made the severity of the diff lock like a little bit more amped up. Like, you know, if it makes me wonder if they've kind of turned it up a little bit to the point to where, like, if you've got your diff locked and you're trying to go around a corner, like, you're gonna have a, you know, you're gonna have a bad situation where your vehicle's just gonna try and plow everywhere. I don't know if that's actually the case. I'm curious to see if they've actually, like, kind of cranked that up a little bit. It could also be another thing that is implemented in hardcore a little bit more than it's implemented in casual, because they didn't really describe, you know, any kind of differences between the two, but that's definitely another point that we need to be thinking about, because, you know, hardcore mode and casual mode do handle things a little bit differently, and they have throughout this entire series. And how could we make a SnowRunner video without talking about the Snorkel? Now, we've talked about the Snorkel before, but effectively what they have stated here and confirmed here that the Snorkel does is basically raise the threshold for water damage. Now, they obviously use the wording more along the lines of install the Snorkel to make sure you don't drown your engine, but basically, effectively what they're saying is by installing the Snorkel, you are like raising the threshold at which your truck starts to acquire water damage, and presumably it won't actually acquire any water damage as long as you keep the Snorkel above the water, as shown in this GIF here. And to be honest, I mean, that would mean that you could ford some pretty freaking deep water if, you know, if the limit to it is actually the top of the Snorkel. And they actually suggest putting a Snorkel on every truck. Now, I don't know if I'm going to put a Snorkel on every single truck, but I think everybody that is going to be playing the game in an objective way will definitely have a Snorkel on pretty much every truck in their arsenal, regardless of what it looks like, because it sounds like the Snorkel is really, and they're pretty much confirming here that the Snorkel is going to be a very, very, very effective add-on, and you would be pretty silly to not install it if you're playing the game in an objective way. Now, to finish off the video, I'm going to briefly touch on suspension and tires, because they did touch on those a little bit, and, you know, and they touched on them in the sense of what they were, like what kind of functional areas they would cover. And basically, suspension and tires, effectively, a lifted suspension will basically allow you to drive over a lot, like basically drive over obstacles without getting anywhere near as much vehicle damage, which makes sense because obviously you're going to have more travel. And they also said that some tire sizes will require you to install a lifted suspension first, which is actually really, really good because that's really, really realistic. Now, I wasn't sure if it was kind of one of those things where you would install whatever tire you wanted and then the game would adjust to it and then you would do your suspension, you know, on top of that. Or if it was like, no, you have to lift your truck before you put those tires on it, which is a lot more realistic of an approach, and I'm really, really glad that that's the approach they decided to take. Now, if you enjoyed this overview of some updated customization information in regards to SnowRunner, make sure to hit that like button. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you're new to the channel, of course, hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell to stay as up to date as possible on everything SnowRunner related. And I will see y'all in the next one. Talk to y'all later.